Next, we're going to talk about sensory supports. It's often believed that we have 5 sensory systems. However, we actually have 7. That is proprioception, gustatory, auditory, olfactory, tactile, vestibular, and visual. We're going to discuss how our students have respond to sensory stimuli and also how they seek out sensory stimuli. When we're talking about responses to sensory stimuli, some of our students might not feel pain or temperature the same as their peers. They might be less sensitive to pain, which can be dangerous if they're not feeling pain or heat or cold similar to their peers. I've had a student in the past that burnt their hands because they didn't feel how hot the water was and they left their hand in there too long. They also might feel adverse responses to specific audio input. This might look like a classroom bell, alarms for drills, hand dryers, and other loud noises. Sometimes students will struggle with certain textures and not wanting to touch those textures. I had students who really loved shaving cream and that was a reward for them, and I had other students who would just gag thinking about touching the shaving cream. It just depends on their response to those specific objects or textures. Some students on the spectrum will excessively smell objects, including people. I've had a few students who really like to smell a person's hair or clothes or try to smell the perfume on their body. And I've also had students who really like to smell armpits, which can cause some obvious problems. It is similar to touching. I've had students who really wanted that tactile input and want to touch everyone and everything. Again, this can cause issues for students, especially when interacting with peers and adults. Visual fascination with lights and movement is a response to visual stimuli. For some students, they might hold their fingers in front of their face and let the light flicker in, or they might hold an object like a string or a blade of grass or a pipe cleaner in front of their eyes and flick it back and forth. Some students have a strong gag reflex that can be induced by certain textures, smells, or foods. And because of this, some students have limited foods that they are willing to eat or they're willing to try. When we talk about sensory seeking, students may have intense interest in sensory stimuli, meaning that they seek out sensory input in a variety of different ways. So this can look like rocking, spinning, seeking deep pressure like hugs or pushing their body up against a wall or objects. They might like climbing into tight spaces or wrapping blankets around them, jumping on a trampoline, wearing a weighted vest, just looking for those proprioceptive inputs. Stimming takes many different forms. It's important to remember that a lot of times stimming behaviors help our students feel calm. It might make them feel better when they're overwhelmed or anxious or dysregulated. So we wouldn't want to necessarily stop a stimming behavior unless it's considered unsafe, and then we would just want to replace that with a more appropriate behavior. And it's also important to keep in mind that students use stimming behaviors or sensory seeking behaviors to also help process information. So if you're teaching a student a lesson and they are rocking back and forth in their chair, that doesn't mean that they're not paying attention or not listening. It might actually help them process that verbal or visual information better.